Welcome back to the Give Me Liberty podcast. I'm joined by Mary Margaret Olohan. We're here at Heritage Foundation.
Yes.
And we're really excited to be here in DC. And you have a new book coming out at the end of May. And the title of the book is Detrans, The Story of Escaping the Gender Ideology Cult. You call it a cult right out of the gate. Why?
Well, we call it a cult because if you read these stories and you listen to what these people have been through, it's very obvious that they were part of a cult, and they will tell you this themselves. I actually asked a bunch of the detransitioners who are in my book, are you comfortable with me using the word cult here? Do you feel like that's a little too radical? And they said, no, it's a cult. We were part of a cult. And this is a group of experts, so-called experts, medical professionals, therapists, surgeons, that will lie to young people and say, you will find happiness if you go through hormonal transition and surgical transition to become another gender, which we know to be impossible. And so the reason that we titled the book in this way is to say, look, these people went through this. Now they're on the other side, and they can tell you that they were lied to, they were manipulated, and they were, in effect, in a cult.
Yeah. So defining a cult, like in the sense of a circular, closed belief system, radical ideology, how would you define it?
I think that's a good way to put it. And I think when you're talking about movements like this, you do have to use verbiage like that to help people understand what's going on. Because in particular, gender ideology is framed in such a positive, loving way. And activists are they're very keen on making things sound like that. So when they talk about so-called gender-affirming care, that's a purposeful activist phrase intended to mask what we're actually talking about, which is trans surgeries, hormones, and puberty blockers, even for kids. But gender-affirming care sounds a lot better, right? It sounds very caring and loving, and they'll say, Republicans are trying to pass anti-trans laws banning gender-affirming care. Trans youth deserve to have access to this care. That all sounds great. And that is their verbiage for it. And so when you look at the enormity of what they're doing here and the language that they're using to talk about it, it seems very evident that there's something more going on here than just politics.
Yeah. They sell the story in such a way that it does sound positive. It does sound loving, except for it's all predicated on a lie.
Right.
A dangerous and destructive lie.
It is predicated on a lie, and I mean, the basic lie is that you can change your gender, right? Because we know that's impossible. A man cannot become a woman cannot become a man. But I think the more insidious lie is playing into something a little bit more spiritual, in that these doctors and therapists and experts are saying you will find happiness if you undergo these pricey hormones and surgeries to become another gender, and that will make you happy. Because the young people and older people who are trying to undergo transitions are mentally ill, right? They're struggling very much. They need help, they need resources. And at the end of the day, they're seeking happiness. And that desire for happiness is very human, but it's being harnessed and manipulated to propel this ideology. And that, to me, is one of the most sad and insidious parts of this whole game.
Who is a part of the con? Like what organizations? Is it American Psychiatric Association or American Pediatrics? I mean, who's really a part of this? Who are promoting, propagating this lie, this cult? Who's in on it?
Well, we could get really general or we could get really specific there. I guess I would say that if you read a media report on this, let's say the Associated Press, what they'll tell you is all major medical associations agree that gender-affirming care helps children. So you could say that all major medical associations are part of this problem and furthering this lie. And most of them rely on the World Professional Transgender Association. I think that's the long name, but the acronym is WPATH, which we know now in the past few weeks has been exposed for these experts promoting experimental surgeries. And in their files, which I believe Michael Schellenberger exposed very recently, we found out that these experts know that hormones cause tumors, that they know that hormones can just completely destroy these young people's sexual function. We know that the surgeries themselves are experimental and hurting people. And the experts admitted all of this. And yet, those are the experts with WPATH, which is producing all of this so-called expertise that all major medical organizations are relying on. So you can effectively say that all these major medical organizations are buying into the lie of very, very bad science, which in effect is not science since it's so shoddy. And unfortunately, I think a lot of medical professionals are scared to even slightly push back. They're scared to defer at all. One of the girls in my book, her name's Helena, when she was taking testosterone, and we can get into the side effects more if you want to, but she was suffering intensely. You know, they were wreaking havoc on her body, mentally and physically. She was just going through it. And so she checked herself into a Chicago hospital because she was in severe distress. And keep in mind, she's a girl. She's loading herself up with testosterone. She checks herself into a hospital and says, I need help. And the hospital, those professionals, instead of saying, oh, well, you are in distress because you're pumping yourself full of hormones, they pretended she was a man. And they said, okay, let's just say you're a man and you are going, you know, you have severe anxiety. We're going to treat you as if that were the case. So they pretended a reality, multiple realities, just weren't there and treated her completely differently. It's not just unscientific, it's just crazy.
Yeah.
It's insane. And poor Helena ended up getting checked back into the hospital multiple times before she ultimately realized, okay, I'm going to have to take care of myself here. This testosterone is really hurting me. And she weaned herself off of it. But that story and one little example there, I think is a really good example of how these so-called professionals are completely failing young people. They're completely failing our society in completely rejecting reality and science and medicine in favor of ideology.
Since 1971, Liberty University has had one mission: training champions for Christ. We've been at this for a while, and in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, we have grown to be a global force. Today, Liberty runs over 100,000 students around the globe, studying across 15 colleges and schools. And among them, over 30,000 military students. Across 700 programs of study, we train as one: nurses, artists, business leaders of the future and today. Together, we work to give back through service trips, local community work, and over 500,000 volunteer hours per year. And we play just as hard as we study, with 20 NCAA athletic programs and 40 club sports teams. So, who are we? We are Liberty University, and we train champions for Christ.
You know, I was watching the other day on YouTube, like these old comedy sketches from back like in the 60s, like Dean Martin used to have this thing. Johnny Carson, you know, in the 60s and 70s had all kinds of spoofs and jokes. One of them was this little skit on a sex change operation. Went into the hospital to like have his appendix removed, but instead the doctor performed a sex change operation. And the whole comedy bit was him and Ed McMahon had like switched, you know, one was a girl, one was a boy kind of thing.
Back when that stuff was supposed to be funny.
And it was supposed to be funny. Like the whole thing, like everybody's laughing at the absurdity of the whole thing. And what was interesting is, you know, back at this time, this is all about medical malpractice and violating your Hippocratic oath. And you're first to do no harm to your patient. But with this kind of ideology, and it's so appropriate that you call it a cult, there's this social contagion in which people have bought into this lie. They are denying all sorts of realities. There's distortions there psychologically, physiologically, spiritually. How is it that this has multiplied and spread? You know, you just had 50 years ago, people would make fun of it. It was the brunt of a joke. But now 1 in 5 Gen Z are saying, you know, I'm trans or I'm identifying as a part of this alphabet soup. It's no laughing matter.
Right. No, it's very scary. And I think part of it is very much due to our lack of understanding of who we are and why we're even here on this earth. And, Mary Eberstadt is a hero of mine. She wrote this amazing book called Primal Screens that gets into this serious issue of lack of identity nowadays, which I think in part can often be due to not having certain parents in your life, whether it's your father or your mother, not being tied to any kind of religion, not having any sense of, like I said, why you're here on this earth. And when you lack that kind of purpose and identity, you look for it in other places, right? I mean, we even hear of people who are incredibly troubled and looked for a sense of identity and found it in Al-Qaeda, for example.
Yeah.
And it's a sad phenomenon that our world is facing and has faced for the past several decades and probably further back. But what we do know is that these young people are finding their identity online because they're being given it by other people who are saying, oh, you feel lonely, you feel afraid, you don't fit in, you don't know what your purpose is. It's because you were in the wrong body. It's because the people who say they love you hate you. And it's because you deserve to be in a different place associating with different people. And ultimately, that identity is becoming another gender and being embraced by the gender community. And it's a very scary community. It's a cult, like we were saying. If you differ from it or dissent from it in any way, they hate you. They will threaten you. They will come after you and harass you. And we know that from the way I've seen detransitioners treated since they came out and were very public about their detransition. They are threatened. They are, some of them are afraid for their lives. Some of them go completely quiet and dark. And you fear for their mental health of how they're doing. Merely for speaking out. We see it in how J.K. Rowling was treated.
Yeah.
Just for saying that a man can't become a woman. God forbid, right?
Precisely.
Can't say that anymore.
Yeah. Well, okay. So this is really, really interesting point. You talked about parents. Depending on what kind of background some of these kids, children, right, minors, who are not adults yet, their frontal lobe is not fully developed. They don't have the full executive function, the decision-making, moral decision-making, judgmental capabilities, right? Those oftentimes come later. That's a whole reason why we need to be raised by parents that fear God and want to establish some kind of moral and religious grounding. But not all these young people are being raised with that. How many of these transitioners either are being raised without parents or parents that have bought into this radical ideology? Oh, and by the way, let me just add one more thing. Single parents.
Right. I think that's a really interesting question. It's something that I tried to get into in my book because I think that one of the most important things when you're talking about this and these detransitioners in their lives is to know what their family was like, what their religious background was like, what their relationship with the internet was like, the relationship with pornography was like. I tried to get into all of this. And I have a lot of siblings, so I have spent the greater part of my life around kids and I honestly raised half of my family. So I am very familiar with some of the pitfalls that kids can fall into in their adolescence and how you should be taking care of them to avoid those kinds of things. And so I asked all these detransitioners about this. And what I largely found was there was some kind of abuse in their background. I found that most of them were exposed to pornography at a very young age. And we often don't talk about girls in this context. Most of these girls were exposed to pornography at a very young age. Even one girl around the age of 5, which is incredibly heartbreaking and sad. Now, most of the girls in my book and the boys were from a 2-parent household. That being said, the relationships between the parents were not great, and most of them, several of them had alcoholic parents, at least one of them, and none of them were raised in families that were practicing their religion. I found that very interesting. One of the girls would occasionally go to church, but she and her mom kind of dropped off after a while, and ultimately her parents ended up getting divorced. So, we talk about the importance of parents and having a stable family background. I think that when you look at those examples, it tells you a lot about what could have been lacking in those situations. On the topic of their early exposure to pornography, I think that's really important, and it's something that I have written a lot about extensively as a reporter. The effects and the links between pornography and sex trafficking, for example, or we cover that in Sound of Freedom, the new movie that gets into sex trafficking and the way that children are being treated. In my book, I harp on it because a lot of these girls in particular were not only struggling with seeing trans content online, but they were struggling with seeing women's depictions in pornography. And multiple of these girls have told me, that doesn't look fun. The guy looks like he's having fun. He's hurting her and degrading her. I don't want any part in that. Combined with what they were seeing on Instagram is these beautiful women who are going on exotic vacations all the time. They're scantily clad. They have unlimited wardrobes. They're getting hundreds of thousands of likes. This is a lifestyle that is being promoted. And these girls are going through puberty and they're thinking, I don't look anything like that. I don't have any of those means. I don't feel like I'm pretty like that. And also, is that how they're being treated when it comes to sexual intimacy? That's not anything that I want. And that scares these girls a lot. And so with these two combined horrifying images, they're thinking, I don't want to be a woman. That's scary. That's too much for me. And ultimately, what they're told by their trans activist friends online is, oh, you don't want to be a woman because you're not one.
Yeah.
And that was a look inside of this movement and this mindset that I hadn't really understood before. You know, we always know that trans activists are very manipulative and predatory with young people online, but I hadn't really understood this female dynamic. And I think it's really important that we talk about it because we already know that women struggle, especially online, with comparison and with wanting to live up to these feminine standards that our society now pushes, whether or not they're actually feminine. But that was combined with the very aggressively sexual imaging of women apparently has very dangerous results.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you pointed that out. And so you have these extremities on both ends, victimization being celebrated, and then the image of a woman, how it's portrayed digitally in the sort of the digital sphere. It's a standard that is unrealistic, completely unrealistic. On the flip side, I was just thinking of this as you were saying it. You have this problem for women. You also have problem for men. Men are despised and hated in culture. If you're any portrayal of a strong man is seen caustic. It's a persona non grata. We don't want strong men. We don't want masculine men. And what's interesting is you have boys now who are transitioning to adulthood. A different kind of word of transition, but they're aging into adulthood, I should say. And as they do, what's interesting is you take the average testosterone of, say, a 65-year-old male from 30, 40 years ago, and you look at the testosterone of a 20-year-old male today, and it's almost equal. Actually, in some cases, 65-year-old men 30, 40 years ago exceed that of the testosterone today. And so there are a lot of emasculated men. And I think some of the same, for the same reasons that you describe.
No, it's a travesty. I think Senator Josh Hawley recently wrote a book on masculinity and manhood, and he dives into the problem of young men who are just feeling compelled to repress themselves, to not really be men. They stay at home. There's a huge crisis in the United States right now of young men just not entering the workforce and playing video games and watching porn in their parents' basements. Yeah. And I think we all know someone that struggles with that kind of lifestyle. You know, it's incredibly frustrating to see, and these men need resources to help them become stronger men. But you're right, these images of masculinity are either, we're told that they're toxic, or that these men need to be more emotional and more like women. Yeah. And then yet we're also told that women need to be more like men. So there's this nebulous kind of middle ground that everybody's supposed to be. I reject that completely. I think that it is nonsense and bogus. But it all is playing into the confusion that young people are experiencing as they go through puberty and as they're trying to discover who they are and why they're here.
Yeah, it's like androgyny is being that's the point, right? Just all, sort of amalgamated into one unisex, right, if you will. Like
you even see that in clothing lines. I joke with my sisters that the popular pants right now I call them farmer pants. They're just very androgynous looking. You can't tell if they just are very loose and ill-fitting, and it looks like either a man or a woman can wear them. I think a lot of Gen Z style is very androgynous. It's intended to look like nebulous.
Yeah.
So you're looking for a university that's perfect for you, a school that has anything you could possibly need.
Anything?
You want a place that has the programs you want to study, and maybe a few more, just in case you change your mind.
I think I'm going to sign up for the fashion design program.
All right. place with state-of-the-art facilities. I mean, look at this campus.
And who doesn't love big-time sports?
And great recreational activities.
Okay, now we're on a roll. Somewhere you can hike, slide, strike, shoot, climb, eat, and most importantly, eat. You want a place that takes you to space? Okay, maybe not, but we can teach you how to fly, or pastor a church, or run a business. And all that with a great view? Yeah, I think I know a place.
Yeah, I think back to, again, I'm going back to just comedy, but Saturday Night Live, it was probably like 30 years ago. They had this whole skit. There was a character named Pat. Pat was this androgynous. You didn't know if Pat was a male or Pat was a female. Voice, body, everything. You just didn't know. And they would constantly make jokes because they were trying to figure out, like, I don't know, is it a guy or a girl? And they didn't know what to call Pat other than Pat, right? Patrick or Patricia, we don't know. Anyway, so going into just talking about your book, as we close, you're writing mainly a fact-based, story-based, where you're going through the lives of individuals who are destroyed and ruined by poor decision-making, poor counseling, medical malpractice. Is there any, I think for those that might be listening, is there any hope for this generation? Is there any way you would say, here's all the problems I've identified, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a way to turn this thing back.
I absolutely think there is, mainly because of the bravery of some of these detransitioners in speaking up. This is new, the detransitioners speaking up. Maybe 5 years ago, and actually I know this for a fact, I was reporting on this 5 years ago, and when we started seeing these stories popping up, I was fascinated because they were so new. And this movement of young people who are willing to put their lives and reputations and names and faces on the line and say, I underwent this double mastectomy. I regret it. It did not change my gender. I want you all to know my story, and I live to tell the tale. That is insanely hopeful. That gives us so much perspective into what they've been through, and their bravery is turning the tide on this fight already. So I'm incredibly grateful to them for speaking up, for sharing their stories with me. And my hope is that this book is going to reach people who might be prejudiced against conservative commentary and not willing to read it, but they'll pick it up and read the story of Chloe Cole, for example, one of the girls in the book, and think, that's wrong. I don't want any part in that.
Well said. Mary Margaret Olohan, thank you so much for writing this book and for all you do here at Heritage Foundation. Certainly appreciate you joining us for this important conversation.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Hey, did you find this helpful? I hope you did. Please like and subscribe, share with a friend, and also go to standingforfreedom.com where you can find more content, articles, podcasts, and our Theology of Politics series, all at standingforfreedom.com.